Good morning, everyone. My name is Fiona Wilson, and I have the honor of being the Executive Director for UNH's Center for Social Innovation and Enterprise, under which this social sector franchise initiative sits. I want to just do a couple of very quick things this morning. Deborah mentioned the 5 social sector franchises that have been accepted into this year's Accelerator program, and we're looking forward to hearing a lot more from you all and working with you all tomorrow in day 2 of the conference. But welcome. You've come from a long way away and you're doing valuable and important work, and we're excited to get to know all of you. We have 2 kind of critical partners and components in helping support our accelerator and the companies that are in that program. So number 1 is the mentors that will be working with those companies throughout the next 9 to 10 months. And we couldn't be doing that work without our partners at the International Franchise Association and their social sector task force. They've been important partners with us in various ways since the beginning of this work. And this year they have helped identify and match each of our accelerator companies with a highly, with a highly qualified mentor who is an expert in commercial franchising. So really helping to bring all of that knowledge from the commercial sector to this work in the social sector, which I think is such an important aspect of the work we're trying to do here, bringing those 2 pieces together. I also want to recognize we're really excited that over the last couple of years, we have sought ways to better integrate UNH faculty and students into this work, not only because we want students who are the next generation of social change agents to be exposed and get experience in this work, but also because we want to sort of harness the resources of the university to help build this field. And so I'm really delighted that we have 5 UNH students who, we had about 35 applications, and we selected from that group 5 of our very best and brightest. So just want to welcome them here today. They are going to be working with us for the next 2 days. They're going to be going out to visit their assigned social franchise in country in January to do field research. And they're going to be working with the CEOs and the mentors over the next 10 months to really document the process that we can all learn from the experience. So we have Gina Occhipinti. She is a student in the Paul College of Business and Economics, majoring in economics and also French. Ana Alejandro, she is a master's in social work student. Chelsea Evanikau, she has a major in biology, but also Africana and African studies. Yusi Terrell, who some of you already know, she is now a PhD candidate in natural resources and environmental science. And lastly, Rachel Vaz, who is a student of the Peter Paul College of Business and Economics, majoring in business administration. So congratulations to all of you, and thank you in advance for all the great work you're going to be doing with this. My second job is to introduce our keynote speaker today. I couldn't be more thrilled that Greg Hills is joining us for a number of reasons. As Deborah mentioned and referenced Kim Alter's comments, we're really excited. We had embarked on this work 3 or 4 years ago because of our fundamental belief in the need to be able to scale and sustain social innovation. There are lots of incredible, innovative approaches to social change and environmental change that have been pioneered around the world, but the sort of not so little secret is that very few of those social enterprises have really been able to achieve the scale we need them to, right? They're effective models, but for a whole host of reasons, they're maybe impacting hundreds of thousands of lives, not millions or billions of lives as we need them to. And so this question of scale and sustainability of social enterprise is vitally important. And of course, we're doing this work because we think franchising is a model that we can harness, a methodology that we can harness from the commercial sector and really apply it to advancing social impact. This question of how we do that is really important. And I think our speaker this morning is going to help give us some really important food for thought. I first met Greg Hills about 4 or 5 years ago, I think, through Dr. Jim Post at Boston University. I had the honor of, Jim was my advisor for my dissertation as part of my PhD program. And it really was an honor to work under Dr. Post. He, with a few others, Ed Freeman and a group of other people, were really part of the group of thought leaders who back in the 1970s were looking at topics of stakeholders and corporate social responsibility. So these ideas of, how do major corporations play a role in societal issues is not new, right? Those people have been working on those issues for many, many decades. I think one of the things that, I realized as a doctoral student and as a former business person was that for all that good work, there was always this barrier, right, that existed between sort of the people on one side who said it's all about maximizing shareholder wealth, right? And sort of people on the other side, and it really was factionalized, the sort of people on the other side that said, no, we have to pay attention to sort of corporate social responsibility. But for many reasons, that was set up as sort of a dichotomy, right? That we can either do one or we can do the other, but we can't do both. Corporations, if we do more corporate social responsibility, it's going to cost us money. And that's going to detract from our primary purpose of creating returns for our shareholders. And so I've long come to believe that that's a false dichotomy. And have spent a lot of my own intellectual work and my own practice trying to sort of resolve that dichotomy. But I think it wasn't really until 2011 when Michael Porter and Mark Kramer first published a seminal, what is now a seminal article in the Harvard Business Review, Creating Shared Value, that really the world started to see that there was a way to integrate corporate performance and impact, social and environmental impact in the world. So Greg Hills has been working with Michael Porter and Mark Kramer, the authors of that important paper, on implementing that work in practice and on publishing subsequent articles on the topic. I'm not going to say more than that because I want him to tell you more about what shared value means. But just suffice to say, as I think, as we all sit in this room and think about the role that business corporations can play, it's a really interesting way to think about how we can integrate both the needs of shareholders and the needs of stakeholders and really make the corporate sector an important part of building this ecosystem around the practice of social franchising. So Greg, we're thrilled to welcome you here today. He comes with a lot of experience, over 20 years of experience, advising organizations on strategy, program design, evaluation, and operational improvement. And he co-leads FSG's global corporate consulting practice, advising multinational corporations on innovative approaches to shared value. FSG is a mission-driven consulting firm founded by Mark Kramer and Michael Porter, and they're really focused on helping leaders who are in search of those large-scale, lasting social change initiatives. So we're excited to hear what you have to say, and I'm going to hand over to Greg. Thanks for being here.
See if I can use this mic. Is this live? Super. Good morning, everybody. Okay, we can do it one more time. Good morning. Okay, good. Coffee's starting to kick in. Well, thank you. Thank you, Fiona. Thank you, Bill. Thanks to everyone at UNH for allowing me to come and spend a little bit of time with you all today. It is, on a personal note, always wonderful to come back to New Hampshire. I was born and raised in this state. This is particularly a nice time to come back with the leaves changing. So it's always nice to drive up from Boston to my home state. I am excited about, we haven't switched over here. Do I need to, yeah, it's right. Okay. So I'm excited to talk about, essentially the topic I'm going to talk about is market-based solutions to achieving scale and social impact. Okay, of which the social sector franchising fits into that broader sphere. So I'm going to talk about essentially two different areas. One is around social enterprises scaling up, and also around major corporations working within their business strategies to achieve scale. So those are the two areas I'm going to talk about today. Before I get into any of the content, I want to start with a story. And I want to take you back with me 10 years. So we're going back to 2007. And I'm in Kampala, Uganda. And I'm sitting in a waiting room. And there are sick children, sick adults, pregnant mothers, waiting to see the nurses and doctors in what is a small health facility. So it's characterized as a clinic. It's on one floor. It's a concrete building, concrete structure. There's actually a second and third floor that aren't finished yet. You see the concrete frame to it. There's no walls, there's no ceilings, no electrical, there's nothing. It's an unfinished hospital, but patients are being seen on the first floor. And I was there because we were meeting with the owner of this hospital, a doctor, and he had aspirations to scale up his business, his health care facility, but he didn't have financing to be able to finish the job. It wasn't under construction, they literally just stopped. He didn't have access to capital to grow this. And we were talking to him about his business, his revenues, his costs, his patient population, et cetera, and his aspirations obviously to help people in the Ugandan community have better health outcomes as well as have a profitable business. Now, why was I there? What was I doing? So my firm, FSG, at the time, we were starting to create a social investment fund, a private sector healthcare investment fund to invest in small health clinics, pharmaceutical manufacturers, retail chains. We actually talked to the folks at the Health Store Foundation at the time, 10 years ago, about sort of social sector franchising models, and to understand what the capital needs were. So we're doing due diligence in Kenya and Uganda and Ghana and South Africa with hopes of creating this fund. It's a long story as to what happened to that fund. It didn't end up happening. It's a separate conversation. But the point, the reason I bring up this story is because our sort of mental model at the time, our theory of change, if you will, was that if you build up the individual healthcare providers in the private sector, then you're going to be providing access to critical health services for folks who weren't getting quality care, who weren't getting access to care in the government sector, which was typically poor quality and long lines, et cetera. And that would sort of, essentially address that problem. I think in retrospect, 10 years later, with the wisdom of experience and learning, it was pretty naive, honestly, to think that was going to achieve health outcomes because of all the other things that were happening around that needed to be supportive of that particular business. Whether it's people having health-seeking behaviors and actually, thinking that going to a medical facility is the right thing to do when you're sick versus traditional healers. People actually having the financing to actually pay for a private sector model when you don't have a national health insurance model. We have the same challenges as here in the States, obviously. Is there obviously financing for actually building these things? That's one thing that we were trying to address. Are there access to affordable medicines? Are there suppliers, et cetera? So it's a range of things that were outside that particular investment opportunity that were super important to the success of both achieving health outcomes and allowing that to be a profitable business. So the theme of what I'm going to talk to you today about is really all of the things that are important to help scale up these market-based approaches to social change that are in the ecosystem. They're outside the walls of the enterprise. That's what's really an important piece. And I will say, I'm coming with my own set of experiences on this and my own lens into this. I know, I've been doing this long enough to know that the wisdom in this room collectively is much greater, obviously, than any individual. So I do look forward to learning from folks in dialogue as we talk about this morning. Quickly about FSG, Fiona mentioned briefly, so we're a nonprofit. We're about 160 people, 150, 60 people around the world, 6 offices in 3 continents, and we work across segments in terms of companies and foundations and nonprofits, et cetera, across issue areas, education, healthcare, economic development, environment, et cetera. And we do a lot of thought leadership But the majority of our business model is doing consulting to various organizations, helping them with strategy and evaluation. Two areas where we've gone particularly deep on, as was already mentioned, one is around CSR and shared value. Our founders, Michael Porter and Mark Kramer, have written extensively on that, as have others of us in FSG in terms of going deep into that area, which is, and I'll explain more about this, is the business strategy of addressing social problems. And we have created a national or a global community of practice called the Shared Value Initiative, where we host convenings, cultivate knowledge, et cetera. It's free to join on the website at sharedvalue.org. We also have done a lot of work around systems change and thinking about system leadership and how do you work in ecosystems. What is the role of philanthropy in ecosystem change? What is the role of companies? And we've coined and popularized this notion of collective impact, which is a sort of structured approach to multi-stakeholder, multi-sector collaboration, typically place-based against a common agenda to achieve societal change. We also have a community of practice around that. So that's sort of FSG. Briefly on me, I've been at FSG for almost 14 years. Before that, I worked at USAID for about 4 years, so I had a lot of work in sort of bilateral space, doing international development. And I've had the good fortune of working with a lot of the sort of major players across sectors. So worked with the Gates Foundation on their global microfinance strategy for a couple years. Worked with NGOs like Oxfam and Save the Children and Management Sciences for Health on their global work. I worked with the IFC. So we've been able to, in addition to a lot of companies, as was mentioned. So I've been able to sort of work at this from sort of different parts of the sectors that are all working on global development. So it gives us an interesting perspective on all of that. So jumping into it, I don't need to read these to you. We all know that the size of the problems that folks around the world, billions of people around the world are facing are dramatic. And this is something that we've been all working collectively on for decades. And the challenges continue to be enormous and hard to address. I think that nothing more needs to be said there, but this is sort of what we're really looking to address. And when we think about market-based solutions, we really need to sort of think about the overlap of these three areas, right? We need to create social impact. That's why we're all sort of motivated to get up in the morning. We need to have financial viability, which means obviously we have a business model that returns enough to continue operations, and so we're financially sustainable. And we need to attain scale. And that attaining scale is what we're talking about today, and it's been mentioned multiple times that is really the holy grail, because we have a lot of pilots, right? They're super exciting, but scale is the real challenge. So, so we want to be effective in serving the poor. How do we get to scale to make the significant impact? Now, I have a question for you all. What do we mean by scale? What is scale? This is not rhetorical. No, I'm serious. So what is a number that would be conceived of as being we've reached scale? Because it's a little bit in the eye of the beholder, but it's helpful to sort of put numbers against it, isn't it? Anyone idea? Geometric growth. It's a growth rate. Okay. Is there an absolute number that we want to hit in addition to the rate of progression? Meaningful dent. Okay. Yeah. How would we define a meaningful dent? Is it thousands? Is it hundreds, thousands, millions, billion? Yeah. Yeah. Quantify the need. So it's the dent relative to the size of the need. Yeah.
I think you're looking for kind of a paradigm shift or a systems change. So if you can grow enough, if you have enough scale that you can influence actually the way water is being distributed or healthcare is being run, or so that's closely social market failure.
Right. So able to do something at a system level such that the change you're making is affecting a broad range, maybe beyond the size of the intervention, right? Yeah.
I mean, so I think that's industry-wide a lot of how we look at scale, but I think also some work that Greg Dees did before he passed was looking at scale also as depth of scale, not just breadth of scale.
Yeah.
It is relative. So how do you look at comprehensive services that you need to, offer to someone who scaling this way, not scaling.
Yeah, I don't know if people could hear that. Sorry. No, she was saying, Kim was saying that that there's a notion of depth of scale in addition to breadth of scale. So the sort of comprehensive services for somebody who needs multiple things. So you're sort of actually impacting with everything that they need versus just one of multiple components of need. Yeah. Yep. Well, maybe one more. Cover the. Sorry.
Let's say you have a target population of
Yes.
1 billion in education.
Yeah.
So but a system that can cover the entire billion, then only scale.
Okay, so they can cover the entire population. Okay, good. So I've got some things I could offer. So here's one way of thinking about scale. Okay, there's other ways, and this was done in the paper I'll talk about in a second, is to think about scale in 2 dimensions. One is sort of, if you think about when you're benefiting consumers, so if you're looking at people at the base of the pyramid and thinking about them and sort of products and services, that's one dimension. The other one is if you're thinking about producers, so think of typically agricultural producers and sort of how many producers are you connecting with the intervention you have. And then actually thinking about the nature of the country. So India, over 1 billion people versus some of the sub-Saharan African countries, which have high populations but are really a little different order of magnitude. So based on some of the work that my colleagues have done, they came up with some notional ballparks of how we might define scale in these different environments. So if you're thinking about a consumer play in India, maybe, 1 million people is a big number. Whereas in sub-Saharan Africa, maybe it's a little bit more modest, 100,000 people in a sub-Saharan Africa where it's less densely populated would be something that would be considered scale. Likewise on the producers, 30,000 versus 10,000. Again, this is sort of a ballpark, gives you a sense of what a potential dent could be in a potential problem where you're starting to get something that's beyond sort of a pilot type thing where we've done something really well with, and we've touched 2,000 people, which is excellent, and it's not obviously enough to address the problem. Yeah. Here.
So when we look at a chart like this, are we talking about how you might create a change in an industry? So, or is this your business? So are we selling, is it your company, social business, selling water in India, 1 million to 1 million consumers, or is it the fact that you're selling water and you have copycats and then we start to see 1 million consumers?
Yeah, it could be either. The unit of analysis for this paper, which I'll talk about in a second, was about industries. But obviously you could think about it in terms of enterprises as well. And I should say that this number, you could imagine adjusting it slightly for things that are sort of consumable goods. Whether it's sort of buying education or buying sort of medicine versus things that are more durable goods, like having a solar system on your home or getting cataract surgery one time for that has a benefit the rest of your life. You might adjust some of these things in terms of that consumer benefit. But this gives a bit of a ballpark. So I'm going to talk. This is the paper I was talking about where that estimate's in there. This is Beyond the Pioneer that some folks may be familiar with. 2 of my colleagues at FSG, who are managing directors in our Mumbai office, wrote this. For disclaimer, they were not at FSG when they wrote this. They were at Monitor Inclusive Markets, which was part of Deloitte at the time. They've since joined us. But they are 2 of the leading thinkers on this work, several papers that they've written on that. And then the second paper I'll talk about is a Creating Shared Value paper by Porter and Kramer. So getting inclusive industries to scale. So that initial paper, what I want to do is actually share with you a quick motion graphic that's going to describe this, and then I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail.
Social enterprises seek to create social impact, good schools, electricity for remote villages, and improved healthcare while producing a profit. They're also known as social businesses or impact enterprises. Many people are excited about the power of social enterprises to address the problems of global poverty, problems that still affect billions of people around the world. But the reality is, few social enterprises have scaled successfully. Most serve hundreds or thousands of people, not the millions who really need them. The question is, why isn't this happening? And what can we do about it? Let's look at the story of a social entrepreneur named Maya, who wants to make clean, safe lighting available to poor rural families. These families use poor lighting options like kerosene lanterns. The lanterns don't produce much useful light, so children can't do their homework once the sun sets. The lanterns are also unsafe, sometimes causing devastating fires, and families can spend a large part of their monthly income on fuel, leaving little for healthcare or education. Maya launched a company to sell safe, affordable solar lanterns to these families. Like any startup, the beginning was tough. She had to figure out her business model, find investors, and hire a team. After 2 years, she had a great product and a committed team. But the business had only sold a few thousand solar lanterns, and Maya was facing a number of obstacles. It was hard to find skilled people to hire into her sales team. Poor roads then made it difficult for her salespeople to reach the villages. When they got there, they found that customers weren't aware of solar energy and didn't trust it. And on top of all this, government subsidies for kerosene made it hard for Maya to sell her lanterns at a competitive price. Even though Maya's lanterns could bring safer and higher quality light to millions, that won't happen until she overcomes these barriers. Maya's tale is common in the world of social enterprise. Many of the challenges faced by entrepreneurs like Maya are not problems within the enterprise itself, but barriers in the ecosystem. These challenges occur at 3 levels: in the value chain, related to public goods, and through government policy and regulation. And these barriers often prevent social entrepreneurs like Maya from achieving real scale. For years, we have tried to address these challenges by investing more money in social enterprises like Maya's, expecting them to overcome ecosystem barriers on their own. But the reality is that solving these complex challenges requires more than just money. It requires people to work alongside Maya and entrepreneurs like her to understand and remove these barriers and help them bring their solutions to scale. It requires industry facilitators. We've seen industry facilitators in action in microfinance in India, mobile money in Tanzania, and smallholder tea in Kenya. The power of the industry facilitator is not about helping a single entrepreneur succeed, but about changing the conditions so many entrepreneurs can thrive and serve millions, not thousands. So, who could be an industry facilitator? Anyone. A donor, a foundation, a non-profit, or an investor. The key is to be able to identify the critical barriers and apply your strengths to taking them down. To learn how you can become an industry facilitator and help entrepreneurs like Maya, go to www.beyondthepioneer.org.
So that paper that was written by my colleagues was a result of a significant amount of research that was done and looking at a bunch of examples and really doing surveys, meeting with people, doing field visits to really understand what was going on and how to characterize these challenges. And as you saw, this is sort of the beyond the firm challenges we typically talk about in terms of lack of access to financing, need for sort of leadership and management capabilities, need for a business model that is sound. Those are the firm sort of challenges, but all of these other value chain, public goods, and government challenges are ones that were seen in a fairly common way, and it manifested themselves differently in different industries. And it's a wonderful time. It's a long paper, but it's a wonderful narrative telling the story of multiple industries and how they evolved and the sort of multifaceted way that they came about. Some of the survey results that came through in doing that was, let's think about the consumer businesses. What are those barriers? And if you look on the value chain side, lack of financing, not for themselves, but for customers, producers, and distributors. So their value chain didn't have the appropriate access to capital to do what they needed to do. Distribution channels to BOP customers. We assume this for wealthy customers that those channels exist, but for BOP customers, they often don't. So this is a challenge. Lack of suitable labor. You can't hire enough people. It's not as attractive to go into a lower paying job than it is a higher paying job. Those types of things. Public goods, not having standards that actually says whether something that you're selling is good or not. You actually can't trust it. Not having awareness of the product benefits is a challenge. And then in the government side, laws and regulations that are that are not helping your industry. So these are things that came out in the survey. One other interesting dimension of this is the distinction between a push versus a pull product. So if you're on the consumer-facing side, and you've got something which is a pull product, so an example of that would be microfinance, where it is sort of well-known with savings-led groups and a long history of people needing to find credit to meet whatever financial need they have, whether it's a shock or whether it's buying books for their kids or whether it's for healthcare or whatever. That's a well-known sort of need. If you create the financial benefit, whether it's a small loan or savings account, that is something that is well-known. If you can create the business model for it, they'll come. Versus a push product where you don't actually know the benefits. You actually don't, so you need to sort of build awareness, and that's where the real challenge is. It's significant for folks. The clean cookstoves industry, folks familiar with the clean cookstoves sort of generally? So, if you think about a rural, low-income home in India, for example, often you're cooking using firewood, and there's lots of fumes, and sort of indoor air pollution is a big problem. These toxic fumes can cause estimated 4 million or so deaths per year from inhaling these toxic fumes. So there are products that provide a cleaner way to cook, and it's similar to the lantern example. It's something where you actually have to educate the customers on what it would be, and you actually have to build a business model around it. So that's something that was looked at, and there were some challenges with this. Folks initially, and I guess I'll back up. This is something that's been tried for decades, okay? International NGOs, governments, donors, and some multinational companies had tried to break into the clean cookstove business and had failed. So in steps the Shell Foundation to be an industry facilitator. They said, okay, we're going to try to use our philanthropic capital to catalyze a market-based solution to this that works. So in 2002, they said, we're going to look at this. They funded 9 separate pilots to try different sort of NGO models and different technologies. And some of the stuff that they learned is that some of the initial technologies, they didn't work very well. They were inefficient. They didn't work like they did in the lab when they actually were put into the homes. They weren't customized to the cooking needs. So there's like a actually poor value proposition, and they were also sort of expensive. They were $20 a pop, and that was a little bit high for some of these homes. So that was one challenge. On the value chain side, there's challenges actually selling it. Actually you had to actually train local sort of entrepreneurs to actually sort of know how to sell this. There was not consumer financing, so they started to wrap around a microfinance loan product that would allow you to sort of take a loan to buy the cook stove. So that was something that started to address that. And then from a public goods perspective, there's just sort of lack of awareness that the fumes that you were inhaling in your home were hazardous to your health. And if you don't know that that's hazardous to your health, then you're probably not going to spend money to sort of address that. It's like people that are drinking water that is contaminated. They don't know it's contaminated because it doesn't smell or look contaminated. So there's a bit of an education process that has to happen there. And then also I mentioned quality standards before. You've got cookstoves that are all across the market, and they have claims, but there's actually no standard setting body that says this is, or consumer reports or something that says this is a good product versus something else. So this is an example in this paper of an industry that was challenged to scale. Shell initially had an idea of getting to 5 million people being reached, and they only reached about 420,000. Okay, and this was a lot of money they're investing and a lot of time. And you actually compare the growth rate in India, which is about 18%, to the growth rate in Africa for the same company, this EnviroFit company, it was 51%. 18% versus 51%. So again, sort of contextualizing, understanding the ecosystem, same company, same products, challenge to growth. So that was a challenging example. The 3 that were mentioned in the infographic where there was success, one was the mobile money in Tanzania. I think folks probably are familiar with the M-Pesa story in Kenya. That one's probably like the most frequently talked about In terms of success of scaling, it's the mobile money transactions in Kenya. That was one that happened without specific industry facilitation, but there was a really sort of confluence of events. They had Vodafone, Safaricom had 80% market share. There was a lot of cultural acceptance of doing remittances from urban locations to rural locations. There was a really advanced sort of agent banking network. None of that stuff existed in Tanzania, so there were lots of challenges. So they actually had to sort of be very adaptive to actually address some of those challenges around the distribution, around not having the market share, et cetera. So, but there's a real success story there. Microfinance in India, I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then there's an example with smallholder tea in Kenya, which is a really good contrast to what's happening with smallholder tea in neighboring Tanzania as well, in terms of how those two industries, one was successful, one country, and one wasn't. And so the decisions that were made to help sort of scale that industry. In terms of the microfinance industry, so I think folks in this room probably are familiar generally with the microfinance space. It started off as nonprofit donor money coming in, savings-led groups, self-help groups that were doing this, and then it morphed into ultimately being commercial enterprises, and you can see the sort of growth rate of active borrowers and gross loan portfolios. This is in India. And there are a range of things that happened here, and what was needed was to actually overcome some barriers that weren't addressed initially. So 3 barriers that we saw. Again, this is sort of thinking about a microfinance provider. Okay, obviously they're lending on to enterprises, but the microfinance institutions themselves were social enterprises, right? Looking to be scalable and sustainable. So they were constrained by the fact that they were getting grant funding, and they didn't actually have a profitable business model. Part of it was because there was interest rate caps, that they were regulated. They couldn't actually have higher interest rates. So they did advocacy to actually work with the government they got an industry association and worked with the government to change the interest rate caps so they could actually have them be higher. There was a shortage of funding for on-lending because commercial investors didn't think this was a viable industry to invest in. There were not ratings, again, similar to the Cookstove example. There's not ratings about sort of whether this is a good investment or not. So they did a lot of work to actually create ratings across the microfinance institutions. They did advocacy to sort of formalize this as a lending sector. And they actually made changes to transform these into actual finance companies, okay, from nonprofits to finance companies. The third is just sort of the classic lack of capacity, technical capacity, managerial capacity to run these as businesses, right? So they're sort of well-meaning nonprofits that didn't have the capabilities to scale up a large enterprise. So lots of investment in training and capacity building to really professionalize that industry. And so you saw lots of growth. That's the getting to scale. There's also a chapter in this paper. This is what happened, and folks that are familiar with this, what happened in the 2007, 2008, 2009 timeframe where lots of people started committing suicide because they had all these debts, and there was a big crackdown on the microfinance industry. So that's sort of the what happens when you're at scale story. But this is sort of the getting to scale story, which I think is really interesting. So just a few lessons from that work that I'll share. And then I'll move on to the shared value work. So this industry facilitation is an important element, okay? It may be not something that as an individual entrepreneur or a social sector franchise organization that you're doing yourself, but knowing that this resolving of the barriers is important. So knowing who could be around the table to partner with to do that is really important. Getting the model right for scale. If you're a nonprofit model that's not used to having a return on investment and having a sustainable business model, that's probably not the right model to scale up. So actually thinking about transitioning this model. We saw that in microfinance. We saw that to some extent in the Cookstove industry. Help connect the dots. I mean, you can be a super innovative firm, but you cannot be successful in a vacuum, right? You have to be successful in a context that you're operating in a system that requires all those other elements. So being aware of those, connecting those dots. Focus on contribution, not attribution. Lots of funders want to know, what is your impact? What have you delivered for impact? A realistic look at any of this knows that all of these things are complex, they're multifaceted. No one institution, no one single investment is going to drive outcomes it's going to be a multitude of actors. So thinking about contribution and what you did to that is helpful. And then lastly, this sort of notion of being adaptive. You want to commit to the long term, but know that you need to evolve and adapt and be emergent and change course as you're going on. So that's the story on the Beyond the Pioneer. I'll talk a little bit about creating shared value. Again, so this was referenced. This is now thinking about sort of larger companies and how companies think about their role in addressing societal problems. And we know the SDGs have come out. I'm counting on the private sector to drive their success. So I've done a lot of work with companies in helping them think through their engagement with society. And there's different ways of thinking about it, but they have different business motivations for why they do this. Okay, some of them they have to comply with laws or their volunteer commitments. Some of it they actually just want to be a good corporate citizen in their community or engage well with stakeholders. And some of it they're doing for profitability and competitive advantage. Okay, often they confuse and conflate these different elements. They talk about them in similar ways. They're very different motivations. So a lot of our work is helping companies clarify why they're doing things. What's their business motivation for addressing this societal issue? So that's one thing to know. And then they do this in different ways. So they have compliance functions, right? So these are their lawyers and others that are making sure they comply with things. They have charitable giving and initiatives. This is the corporate foundation, corporate philanthropy, community giving. It has all sorts of different names. They have sustainability efforts. So this is the global reporting initiative type stuff they're reporting on. This is their water footprint, your energy footprint, your waste footprint, et cetera, et cetera. And then there's business strategies, right? So you've got business units, you're driving you're commercializing products and services. You've got a whole manufacturing footprint. You've got a procurement operation, all that stuff. What is your business strategy? So some of these will actually be these shared value opportunities where you're actually driving profitability and competitive advantage while you're addressing a societal issue. So it's part of the overall portfolio. Not all business strategies are creating shared value. Not all sustainability efforts are creating shared value. Not all philanthropic efforts are creating shared value, but all of these could in different ways, and ideally they're integrated. Okay? So what is shared value? So shared value is this concept, again, that my colleagues, Mark Kramer and Michael Porter, our founders, coined with our work with Nestle about 11 years ago, 2006. We've written about it in the Harvard Business Review article that was in 2006, and then this one in 2011 that got the most attention. So this is the quote from Michael Porter and Mark Kramer in that 2011 article. Since then, we've partnered with Fortune magazine to have this Change the World list put out every year. So it just came out last month, the third of those lists. 50 companies. It's not a ranking, it's a list. There's a distinction, but they are numbered 1 through 50, but it's not a ranking. And it shines a bright light on companies that are being innovative and looking to do things at scale within their business. So it's worth checking that out. Companies are looking to embed social purpose in their overall positioning and their work. So Nestle moving from a food company to a nutrition company. CVS, folks are probably familiar with them eliminating their $3 billion tobacco category, and at the same time changing their name to CVS Health. Not a coincidence. They're positioning themselves as a healthcare company versus a pharmacy. Lots of examples of companies doing that. So shared value is essentially moving from the traditional model of CSR and philanthropy where you're taking a chunk of the pie and giving to a social issue, so sharing the value that had been created, to something where you're actually increasing the size of the pie. You're increasing your business value and also creating social value at the same time. So it's a different model. It's sustainable. It's something that you, as you create social impact, you're creating business impact. And as a result of creating business impact from social impact, you're continuing to innovate to increase the scope and scale of that impact. It's this virtuous cycle of actually achieving social impact and then having business impact. And that sort of, again, it's not just philanthropic dollars, it's within your business model. Quick example, this is the ESL Federal Credit Union, which is in Rochester, New York. I worked with them on their shared value strategy. It's fairly straightforward. They were thinking about ways that they could reach the unbanked and underbanked in their community who were not existing customers. okay, because they were not perceived as being profitable enough. And the extent to which they could do that by thinking differently about the payback period for customer acquisition, thinking differently about the financial literacy needs of those customers, thinking differently about what they require for assets that they can demonstrate. They could provide them with much needed financial services, increasing their market share, and they had the biggest market share in Rochester, even relative to the larger banks, and their wallet share, and they continue to innovate to improve those services. Again, a virtuous cycle of serving an unmet need and not doing business as usual, right? This is changing how you think about business opportunities based on that social need. And so we're seeing this both in the developed and developing world. BD, which is Becton Dickinson, folks may be familiar with. It's a medical diagnostic equipment. They've got this HIV co-infection social challenge that they identified, created these safety devices that protects the health workers from getting stuck. This is 25% of their revenues now. This is not a side business. This is 1/4 of their global revenue. They get asked about it on their investor calls. This is commercial, but it's having lots of health benefits. I mentioned the M-Pesa, the work in East Africa. Again, this is sort of a at-scale social enterprise. We talk about shared value being created in 3 different levels. Just to sort of frame this, sort of reconceiving products and markets, how you think differently about either what you're selling or to whom you're selling. So it's, again, beyond business as usual in terms of what you're thinking. So this is GE selling a ultrasound machine that is low cost, portable, that can be used in rural villages to help increase access to prenatal care for expectant mothers, and doing that commercially and at scale. Redefining productivity in the value chain. This is Intercontinental Hotels Group. They have a Green Engage product where they assess the water footprint and energy footprint of their hotels, and they can reduce their costs up to 25% in terms of their energy use and water use, and obviously improving environmental footprint. And this last one, enabling local cluster development. This is thinking outside the walls of the company, and what are things you can do to improve your competitiveness. And Mars, the chocolate company, sources most of its cocoa from Cote d'Ivoire in West Africa. And so they've been working to improve farmer livelihoods by increasing the productivity of those farmers. There's an opportunity to triple or quadruple their yields. So it improves their incomes, but also increases the supply of quality cocoa for Mars and for other companies. This is pre-competitive. Mars has no boots on the ground there. So they're working with the government of Cote d'Ivoire, with the Gates Foundation, World Cocoa Foundation, with USAID, with Nestle and other chocolate companies. So those are the 3 ways that they create shared value. So now getting back to the ecosystem concept, because we talked about this with social enterprises. The same challenge exists for companies who are trying to do shared value. This new products piece that's one thing. You can do your R&D, you can develop your product, but then when you start to think about redefining your value chain, improving societal conditions in the operating environment, this gets harder because there's things that are outside your control. So decreasing legitimacy and control as you get farther out, and increasing time and cost of change. So as you start to think about changing this environment, it ends up becoming more challenging. Here are some more details on those: supply services, delivery services, policies and informal rules, social norms, input provider norms. These are all things that are in the ecosystem which companies are operating that can be addressed, and if you want to actually have scale on some of these things that are typically considered some sort of market failure, then this is how we're intentional about addressing those. So a quick example, Yara, which is a large fertilizer company, folks may be familiar with, operating in Tanzania, had a range of challenges in terms of their ecosystem, in terms of their ability to transport the inadequate transportation infrastructure, so the crops are being spoiled because they can't get it to port fast enough, long transportation time for fertilizer to the farmers. So there's some just basic infrastructure stuff. There's some policy challenges, both corruption and bans, and then some norms and behaviors in terms of lack of access to credit, low yields, et cetera. So what did they do? There was this multi-stakeholder effort where it was a $3.4 billion 20-year investment, so long-term, lots of money, but lots of different organizations, 68 organizations working together in what was called the SACCO, the Southern Agricultural Corridor of Tanzania, public-private partnership to address these issues in a comprehensive, intentional way to improve that broader ecosystem that no one organization could actually address themselves. Had to come together to do this collectively. And the results, again, from a commercial perspective, 50% increase in sales, 42% increase in EBITDA, and they were only at 2% of the overall investment. So this is something where, this is sort of a gold standard example. This is a really large, both geographically and financially example, yet so the concept itself is something that I think is really applicable. The last thing I'll say is this, I mentioned this term collective impact, which is a sort of structured collaboration. It's something that we've written about and researched a lot and done a lot of advising of folks on. It's where companies are not the only agent of change. They actually work with other stakeholders to get this done. And there's a whole methodology that we've come up with that sort of allows you to sort of figure out how do you do that effectively, because we know that multi-stakeholder efforts can be really challenging. I won't go into the details of that. Before we get to discussion, maybe it's just a few concluding thoughts on this. And that is, first is that market-based solutions are not a panacea, right? They're not going to solve all of our societal problems, right? We know that. And we know that government and NGOs and funders still have a vital role to play, particularly where there's market failures that will continue to be market failures. There's some things where government cannot step aside for market-based solutions to solve everything. We know that. So that's one thing that's important to say. Secondly, we do know that the market-based solutions do have enormous promise to be scalable, to be financially sustainable, and that we have examples of that where it's actually worked really well, whether it's a social enterprise growing or it's a company that's reconceiving how they think about their business, changing beyond business as usual. And then lastly, which is a theme that I opened with, is this notion of the ecosystem, the what's beyond the enterprise is so important. It's something that I think in the work that we all are doing, the work that we're doing at FSG, we're focusing more and more on the system in which folks are operating, the context, the players, the relationships among those organizations, and how to be intentional about sort of changing how they work together so that we can improve some of these things that have been challenging. We talk about systems change. It's important because essentially systems hold problems in place. We can have really good actors, but the systems hold those problems in place. So we need to change the systems so that they are no longer holding those problems in place. So I'll stop there. We've got a little bit of time for Q&A. I know we started a little bit late, but yeah, okay. So I will open it up.
And we want to use the mic so that we can get it on the recording. So if you have a question, I'll bring it to you. Here we go.
Greg, thank you so much. That was great. I wondered if you could just share your thoughts. I know you had the pleasure, hopefully the pleasure of being part of our advisory board meeting last night. So you have a sense of the kind of work we're trying to do with this shared value, social sector franchising initiative. Could you just comment from your perspective on what kinds of things do you think we as we build this community of practice, and essentially we're trying to act as industry facilitators, right? What are the pieces that we're doing that are good, and what are the pieces that we're not doing yet that we should be doing?
Yeah.
And where should we draw on others to help us?
Yeah, so I actually thought about this as the conversation was happening last night and a little bit overnight, so thank you. So the discussion for folks that weren't there was really about is thinking about the roundtable and its role in the world of social sector franchising and what should the role be. A couple things I would say. One is that we all know this, but this is an incredibly crowded and jargon-filled space, okay, and social enterprises, social entrepreneurship, impact investing, et cetera, and there is risk of being sort of swallowed up in that sort of jargon soup, and having a challenge. And I'll step back. We are contributing. We FSG have contributed to this jargon soup. I fully acknowledge that. But there's risk of not being able to sort of get the voice out there, and I think that's part of the challenge of being sort of small and sort of a bit nichey. And I think someone was saying that that it's sort of it's a little bit mystifying as to sort of what this is, and we need to make it clear. So I think that's one thing is sort of what is it, and there's it's part communications, but it's actually part sort of clarifying exactly sort of like what it is versus the other things that are going on. So that's one. Two, I think it's important to think about what problem we're trying to solve. Okay, someone mentioned last night that we need to come up with a theory of change, but I think it's important to sort of say, okay, what is it that we are seeking to solve with this roundtable? What is that? What is the need? What is the gap? Is it about we need to increase understanding of this model? So it's something where we want to shine a bright light on it to inform people. Is it about inspiration to try to get people who understand the model to do it because they see examples and are inspired to do it? Is it about capacity building, where people are inspired and they're informed, but they don't know how to do it and they actually need to be trained? They need to sit with other practitioners who have done it and learn. They need to go on site visits. They need to do demonstrations, et cetera. Is it about informing the funding community that this is important and should be a priority over all the other things that people think should be priorities? Because that would have a real sort of orientation around in which funding communities. Is it bilaterals? Is it multilaterals? Is it high net worth? Is it foundations, et cetera? So that's sort of like what the problem we're trying to solve and sort of what is our unique slice of activities. And then lastly, and this is, I guess it goes without saying, but I think it's important to emphasize is you're a small group. You need to partner. And you need to partner in smart ways with folks who bring things that you can't bring and won't ever be able to bring. Because you don't have a lot of resources, you're a small group, you're not in a major metropolitan area. So there's need to have some of those gaps to be filled through partnership with folks who can help facilitate some of those challenges. I don't know, those are just a few things off the top of my head. There may be others.
That's great. Thank you, Greg.
Yeah.
Sure, Adam.
Yeah.
Introduce yourself, please.
Hi, I just had a quick question about your kind of system change, and I agree completely. I think it's super important. But I think you were talking about it primarily from actually working with the system and trying to develop the system and change it through that. What do you think about kind of being a disruptor as a system, working against it or working outside the system to then try and create change as a result of that?
So I think if you are trying to sell within the system, or if you are have producers who are base of the pyramid who are within the system, then you're in the system. Mm-hmm. You're not outside the system. You're a system player. Whether you're well connected to the system or whether the system is functioning or not is a separate question. But I think that we often say in doing this collective impact work, if you want to change the system, you need to get the system into the room. Okay? So that means not just having your bilateral donors with their NGO partners sitting around and saying, oh, this is what we need to change, but it's actually getting the relevant members of the system into the room. So for healthcare, for example, pharmaceutical providers and clinics and hospitals and like the medical associations, all of the sort of folks within the system, and then the policymakers, et cetera, the donors together. This is what we did. So I referenced the cocoa sustainability work in Cote d'Ivoire. That was a system play. We literally had the government of Cote d'Ivoire at the table with the World Cocoa Foundation and Gates and others. We had Mars and the government of Cote d'Ivoire sign an MOU, and some of this was around sort of the tax levies on cocoa that's being exported and reducing that so that they could actually give more of the revenue to the smallholder farmers. So literally thinking about it from a broader system play and being able to have your voice of the key challenges or opportunities be contributing to that change versus being on the outside and sort of hoping that others will do it for you. Yeah.
So does that include, because I haven't heard you really talk
Sorry.
about that.
Yes, the question is whether that includes consumers. Yeah, so I think it does. So I mean, a lot of the work that my colleagues in India and the authors of that report have done and do include deep consumer-based research on needs, so that you can have that be informed by their actual needs as opposed to what assumptions you're making about what their needs are. So, for example, one of the extensive projects they've done, which is over a 7 to 9 year period, was around affordable housing in India. So there was if you think about a certain segment of the population that sort of tier 4 or whatever, that has income, that has an ability to make a mortgage payment, but there's not financing for them, there's not housing stock for them because developers think it's not a profitable segment. There's all sorts of sort of system challenges that prevents those people from having enough inventory. So what we did is actually our team in India worked to sort of address a lot of those barriers. But one thing we did is actually sat down with people in those consumer segments and understood sort of what were the key drivers that they would have for purchasing decisions in terms of size and location and amenities, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, to actually create and design what those housing units would look like based on their actual identified needs, so that you could actually change. So the hundreds of thousands of housing units that were created that actually met the needs of these people, and also changing the financing rules and regulatory rules, and getting housing developers to actually see this as a commercial opportunity. So yeah, at its best, consumers and individuals are at the table as well, or in some way being able to give input.
Wonder if you could talk either more about the Mars example or other examples. With regard to system change, it seems intuitive to me that somebody or some entity that's got power is going to get displaced somehow. And if you're inviting those people to the room, I'm just wondering if you have a live example or if you can talk to that and how you've worked through that. Maybe it's if you're a smallholder farmer and they typically go through brokers, but now they're going through wholesale distributors, that broker's now maybe left in the cold. I don't know if you have any examples of that, but I'm imagining that's a problem you might run into.
Terrific question, yeah. So I'm stalling for time here. That's what people say when they don't quite know what yeah. So right, so the issue of power in systems change is a critical one, right? So if you're seeking to do systems change and you're not addressing power dynamics head on, then you're probably not addressing systems change, because essentially we talked about the holding the problems and systems holding the problems in place. What typically has to happen is you have to sort of shift the power dynamics, give people who don't have voice and don't have power more of it, and it does tend to be a zero-sum game. So are they at the table when they didn't used to be at the table? So you actually start to have input there. So that's the general response. In terms of the Côte d'Ivoire example, I think that what happened there is initially we were working with Mars directly. So FSG was contracted as a consulting firm. Essentially, that we were providing the industry facilitator services on behalf of Mars, with Mars. And that was sort of a Mars intervention initially. But to actually make it work and successful and at scale, we needed to bring in the other chocolate companies. We needed to bring in Nestle and Cadbury Schweppes and Hershey's, et cetera, to make it at scale. And then they had to sort of do this sort of dance of, okay, well, we're competitors, but we're actually working together on this, because we actually, if this cocoa sector goes into virtuous decline over the next decade, then we're all going to have challenges around our sourcing. So they had to give up some control over decision making. They had to give up control over access to the government, et cetera, and they had to do that together. So it's now, if you can Google it, it's called Cocoa Action. It doesn't say it's Mars's initiative, because it's not. It's a collective initiative. So they give up the ability to talk about it from a branding perspective, like, oh, this is our initiative, we get credit for it. So you're losing that in terms of your benefits. But I think, again, if you are able to subordinate your own sort of individual company desires for that broader good, which, by the way, also is in your company's interest, and that's where some of the power dynamics start to shift.
I think I have more of a commentary than a question, and that I think that it's so appropriate to start with the concept of scale, but you have to be really careful that you don't get seduced by scale. And I think this is one of the challenges in this room, that because there's no shortcut to getting to that, to getting to scale. And if we talk in a world of franchising, what does scale mean? Okay, like there's about 3,400 franchisors in this country. And if you're in that private sector of franchising, scale's like, okay, 1,000 units. That sounds really good, right? Okay, well, if you most look at these systems, it takes, most of them don't get there. That those that do get there, it can be like a 10-year process. So you look at like a concept like UPS store, mailbox, et cetera. You know, they started in 1980, 1990, they opened up 1,000 units. It took them 3 years to open up the second 1,000 units. So but there's no shortcut. And particularly in this group here is that, I mean, and the donors are driving, the large organizations, everybody wants scale and they want it quick and they want it to happen immediately. And you can't shortcut the life cycle of an organization. And your point is just so correct in that the market solutions can't replace public sector, but you can't drive market solutions down this path of, if I don't have scale, however you measure how many lives I've touched, how many malaria vaccines I put out there, or whatever, or pills I put out there, and you drive that, you're shortcutting the space that these entrepreneurial market-driven solutions are trying to address, but they can't be shortcut on their cycle, on their business cycle.
Yeah, Peter, that's a good point. I think it's, and I referenced this earlier briefly, the sort of post-2007 microfinance industry story in India is a cautionary tale for that, because you had for-profit investors, right, who were looking for super fast scale to get to faster returns for their commercial investments. So it drove behaviors that were looking the other way about someone's credit worthiness, right? They gave the same person, different companies gave the same person loans. So someone had like 5 or 6 loans that they had, and there was no visibility to the fact that that person was so far underwater in terms of their indebtedness, because of the incentives of, we need to get to scale, without sort of thinking about the impact, the social challenges that could create. Yeah.
I often talk about franchising as the business of patient capital. It requires patient capital. You can't shortcut it.
Yeah.
You won't get there.
Yeah.
Great. Well, thank you so much, Greg. I think this has been a incredible frame-setting conversation for what we're going to be doing this afternoon, which is really delving deeply into the entire ecosystem challenges of this space of social sector franchising. I think this helps us to think about some of these complexities and some of the things that, as we start to build this out, that we're going to have to deal with. And I think this is probably the best possible way we could have begun this conversation. So I really thank you for your time. Let's hear it for Greg.
Thank you.
And he'll be sticking around for a little while, so at the break you'll have a chance to talk to him and ask him your own questions. So